You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike.
Welcome into the Psych with Mike library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan. I'm here with Mr. Brett Newcomb.
Once again.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good enough. How are you?
I'm interested in what you're going to say today. I think an ongoing topic as we try to talk to people about going to therapy or being a therapist, a topic that is a sub rosa level of consciousness or concern, is the level of genuine reality that a clinician shares about themselves with a patient, a client. And do you call them patient or client? Are they? Do you follow the medical model of their patients? They're sick in some way. Are there clients who come to you as a professional and hire your professional responsiveness? I think words matter.
Yeah,
I think what you hear, but it also helps define the parameters of the relationship and the conversation.
I think that words matter, but I also think that what you were taught matters. And I was brought up at a time and in a university program in graduate school, which you are very familiar with, that
I taught in that program.
Was very specifically against the use of the word patient.
Yes.
That they did not want to imply pathology. They really hammered into us the idea of the word client. And so I blanch when I hear people in our profession call the people that they work with patients, although there is no right or wrong. There's no...
Well, there is. There's always a right or wrong. People say, there's no right, to cut themselves some slack. But in a previous podcast we talked at some length about if it's possible to have a relationship with a medical provider to complement or enhance your treatment protocols. And it's advisable to have that, because there are times when it's ethically appropriate or ethically required for you to make a referral to a physician for medical assessment.
Right. There's
an area and a body of knowledge that you don't have that could be directly involved in what the life experiences your client is having. In my experience, physicians are trained with the medical model and refer to their clients as patients. I have this patient who, I have this patient that, I have this patient among other patients. And we were trained to say I have a client. So there's an implication of a relationship division that's implied in the use of the words. And it's more likely that I have an unstructured relationship with a client, an unethically bound structure, whereas a physician with a patient has a more bound structure. What's interesting, my personal experiences with physicians have been that in the areas of their friendships, they don't make those distinctions. If they have friends who become patients, they're not troubled by any ethical limitation or knowledge overlap, which is kind of jarring to me, because I've been trained not to do that with my clients, not to have those friendship overlaps. If I have a client that I am seeing who says to me, I really enjoy our conversations, why don't we go to dinner? Or when we finish this treatment that I'm doing with you, we can be friends, because we like the same kinds of movies, we read the same kinds of books, and how do they know that? How do they know what movies you share? Do you give them that information? Do you explicitly give it to them, or do they pick it up from the surround? Because when they come into your office, they look around and see what magazines are on your desk, what books are on your bookshelves. They hear your conversations in the hallway with other colleagues or other people, and they're like, oh, I've been to that restaurant. Oh, I like that Japanese food. What do you think about this? Have you ever tried this? And in order to, it's a real complex issue, but in order to ensure their acceptance / affection in your eyes, they may want to bring you presents. And so do they bring you cookies? Do they bring you cake? I remember having a conversation with a psychologist friend of mine who had a client that was a stewardess for an airlines. And the stewardess was flying to a locale on a regular weekly basis. She had a regular run where leather goods were sold.
Mm-hmm.
And so my psychologist friend said to the stewardess, hey, if you see X purse, I would really like to have one. And so then the stewardess brings it to the psychologist and says, here, I got you this present. And the psychologist said, no, let me pay you for that. I didn't mean for you to buy it. And the stewardess was like, I really want you to have it. I got it for you. You need to accept it. So then the psychologist in supervision group that we were in was saying, can I have it? I want the purse. And the rest of us were saying, what does that do to your relationship with your client?
If anything.
If anything.
But yeah, and not only what does it do to the relationship from your perspective, but can you think about what it does to the relationship from the client's perspective?
Right. Yeah. Especially if your client grew up in an abusive environment in which they learned they were not inherently valuable. If you learned as an infant, one of the first scripts that you internalized is that your mother or your father were not emotionally available to you based on your need of hunger or pain or fear, but that in order for you to obtain things from them like food or affection or attention, you had to be seductive. You had to be happy, smiling. You had to meet their needs. You had to figure out what they wanted, and you had to do those things so that they would smile on you. So if you grew up internalizing that script, and then you come into therapy later in your life to deal with how does that play out in your life? Do the dominoes continue to fall from that script? Do you continue to be primarily oriented on having a seductive personality so that people will like you? Are you buying acceptance? Are you saying, I will give you something that you value so that you will like me, as a fundamental approach to how you interact with people? Because that's an important clinical discussion to be had. If that reality exists in that person's life, as I regularly said to some of my clients, patterns repeat, patterns repeat, patterns repeat. So if you've developed acquiring relationships from this pattern of seductive behavior, you still will do that.
So my thinking on the whole patient-client nomenclature is this, and then I want to ask you, is this what you are saying, or is what you are saying somehow nuancedly different? But I feel like that it's about the power dynamic. So patients, the doctor is in authority, and it's a top-down kind of dynamic.
Yeah.
Client is more equilateral. We're more on the same level, and I actually work for the client.
The message is, you're hiring me, I work for you.
Yeah.
You're
That's
paying
what
me
I'm
for
right.
services. Like if I went out to a corporate entity and they hired me to do a workshop, then I'm working for them.
Exactly.
Even if my workshop is on dealing with difficult people in management.
Yeah. So is that do you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so I'm more comfortable in my conceptualization of what I do as a career to use the word client, because that fits more with how I see my interaction with the people
I
that
agree
I work
with you 1,000%. And it overlaps an issue called boundaries. How do you have appropriate boundaries? What are appropriate boundaries? If you have an office where your client comes in and you see adolescents, and you have an office with music posters all over the wall, or game trophies for electronic games, or game, whatever, however they come now, stacked on a bureau, and your adolescent client sees those, and they're like, oh, I play that game, and I listen to that band, but I hate this band. Does that give them a sense of who you are outside of the room, of how you live your life? And then they'll ask questions. Have you been to this movie? Do you like this character? You wearing a sports memorabilia shirt today? Do you like that team? I mean, all those things are informational overlap. And the question becomes, and we discuss it ad nauseum in training classes, how do you structure your environment to affect that impact? Do you provide stimuli that could trigger, or do you make it as sterile as possible? Do you do the classic Freudian psychoanalytic thing where you're the tabula rasa, the blank mirror, and the client looks in the mirror and sees a reflection of himself, but they don't see you, they don't know you? Do you offer opinions or share likes and dislikes, whether it's I don't like sports or I like spaghetti? It doesn't matter. Do you give those kind of responses? And so there are theories in the training systems, protocols for clinicians that say you should do that or you shouldn't do that. Pay your money, take your choice. I don't know which one is correct. So at some level, psychotherapists are trained to say, be a real person, have some genuineness and some warmth, identify differences, identify similarities, share those, all in the effort to do accurate, empathic, reflective listening. So as we chat, I am communicating to you that I see you clearly the way you need to be seen. And then I can offer at some point a process evaluation of how I'm experiencing you. When I say this or I ask that, you have this reaction. You seem to have this reaction. I'm wondering, am I on target? Do you have that reaction? Do you have that feeling? But there's more time spent chatting. Oh, I went to the horse races last week.
Right.
Oh, I've been to the horse races. Did you win any money?
Right.
Do you have those conversations, or do you just say, tell me more about your depression?
Yeah. And so the classic psychoanalytic model would say that you sit somewhere outside the peripheral vision of the patient, because they would call them patients, and that you don't have those kind of chatty little conversations, that you are very, very quiet, which I would fall asleep if I did that. But
a good friend of mine sent their son to a classic psychoanalyst for a number of years, and the son was telling me that he would lay on the couch, and the clinician would sit behind him and take notes, and basically all he ever said was, how do you feel about that? Say more. Can you say more about your mother? And so he said one morning he really had a breakthrough, and he really cried and talked about some stuff that was really powerful for him. No response from the therapist, no questions, no feedback, no nothing. He looked around, the guy was sound asleep.
Yeah, the guy was sleeping.
So he said, I put my shoes on, I tiptoed out of the office, and I never
went back. Didn't pay for that appointment either.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And so that is one view.
Yeah.
Then your view is an alternate view. I think those are two sides of the spectrum. And then each individual has to decide, where do you want to be on that spectrum?
Well, because they will ask you, have you ever been divorced? Do you have children? Have you ever had a sexually transmitted disease?
Right.
Have you had problems with alcohol? Do you have any addiction history? They want to know, in part because they want to normalize their own experience. I'm not so off the edge because I'm here with this issue, if maybe you've had this issue too.
Right.
And when I was first coming into doing this 35 years ago, there were a lot of treatment centers in the St. Louis area for alcohol treatment. And their hiring protocols, half of the staff were, I don't know what the right word to use is.
Recovering.
Recovering from their own addiction issues. And the other half were clinically trained. So there was, because both languages needed to be spoken and understood.
Right.
I think they've gotten away from that now, but I think that was their focus.
Yeah, because now if you're not licensed, then they can't employ you. But I grew up in those kinds of behavioral centers and was going to school studying psychology, got a job working there because I was pursuing a degree, and then went through my own recovery process during that period of time. And so I had both perspectives.
Right.
And I can tell you without a doubt that I much prefer people having the clinical knowledge to having the experience. Experience does not equate to an understanding of human psychology.
The objectivity is not there. It's based on what your experience has been.
Okay, let's go to our break, and when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about the video.
Okay.
All right. You know, if you've gotten this far into the show, then obviously you find the show to be worthwhile, beneficial, maybe even helpful. And so I just wanted to say, if you've gotten this far into the show and you want to help us out, even if you don't want to help us out, just do it anyway. Go to Apple Podcasts and rate us and leave a review. That is super helpful. Subscribe to the show on YouTube and hit the bell icon so that you get notifications when new shows drop. That stuff is really, really helpful for us. And I know that Mr. Brett agrees.
Absolutely. Reviews are positive. Positive reviews are more positive, but negative ones are as well, because it helps you decide how to focus and how whatever you're intending to say is being heard.
And the secret is the algorithm doesn't care whether the review's positive or negative.
As our friend Mike Norton says regularly, feedback is a gift.
If it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike. Okay, we're back.
All right.
So, all right. So, and I obviously will include a link to the video in the show notes if people want to watch it. It's really short, and it really doesn't have any information other than the girl is saying, "Hey, Susan's my therapist, and she doesn't tell me anything about herself."
She has her office in her home, which is the thing that we were advising.
I was just going to ask you that. Isn't it incredibly ironic that Susan won't disclose anything about herself, but has her office in her home?
And depending on her client population, it could.
And not that there's anything wrong with that. I don't have a problem with her having her office in her home. But to have such strict clinical boundaries and then invite people into your home, I just thought that was incredibly ironic.
I think it is. And I was trained that there's no way in hell that you would ever have clients in your home because it crosses all those boundaries.
Right.
However, I have had clients visit my house for sessions. I've had it in periods when I didn't have an outside office, when I was just agreeing to do on a limited basis a level of interaction. But it doesn't matter. I mean, I was trained not to do that. I was told that in and of itself is an ethical breach, and it will get in the way of your ability to do therapy.
And so I grew up.
I would disagree.
Yeah. I grew up, and I didn't really watch Growing Pains, but I knew of the show Growing Pains.
I know the name.
So Alan Thicke in Growing Pains is a psychiatrist who his wife gets a job, a high-powered job, and I don't even know what she did, but she's got to go to work, and so he moves his office into his home so that he can be there for the kids.
His children.
Yeah, and so I always thought, wow, that would be so cool.
A dozen emotionally distressed people every day to surround your children with them.
My wife freaking lost it.
Yeah.
She's like, there is no way that you're going to work out of our house. That's just not going to happen because people know then where you live. And I'm not saying that anybody that I've ever treated.
So there's this little, 10-minute, 12-minute video,
Yeah.
cartoon video that was on Aeon magazine, one of their things. Aeon is an online magazine that deals with psychological issues.
Which Mr. Brett Newcomb loves, by the way.
I love psychological issues.
No, you love Aeon magazine.
And it discusses, in the vignettes in the cartoon, these things come up. But I was struck by it because my wife listened to this as well when you sent me the link. And she started laughing. She said, we have recently read a book called Maybe You Should Speak to Someone by Lori Gottlieb, which is an excellent book, and I would recommend it.
I've never read it, but I've heard excellent, and I like her. So
she is a therapist. She is a clinician who had some issues in her life that were making her so unbalanced emotionally that she thought, okay, I need to go to therapy. The question for a therapist is, if you need a therapist, who do you hire?
Right.
I mean, you know a lot of other therapists, many of whom you make your own judgments about, saying, yeah, because you know them socially. You don't necessarily know them clinically. And there can be differences in the way I behave when I'm out socially and have a drink and I'm talking and I'm partying and I'm trying to be a smartass, and when I'm in a clinical session where
But-
I may not be trying to,
Right.
I may not be trying to be a smart ass.
You know that struggle because when you decided you were
Right.
going to go to therapy, that was something that you considered.
Right.
Who am I going to go talk to?
Yeah. Who do you trust?
Yeah.
And who are you willing to take those risks with? But in her book, Gottlieb is saying that when she went, she asked her friends, who would you go see? Who should I go see?
Mm-hmm.
Somebody eventually gave her a name. And then she was eaten up with, how does this person know who they're referring to? You know, is it professional knowledge? Is it personal knowledge? Do they go out to dinner? Do they go to movies? I wonder what kind of furniture they have in their house, you know, stuff like that. And then she said she went to the therapist's office session after session, and the guy like always wore slacks and a sweater. Mm-hmm. And she was like, don't you have any other clothes? Do you have a tuxedo? Do you ever get dressed up? And, you know, so even though she was there as a skilled and knowledgeable clinician dealing with some pretty severe emotional stuff about death and dying, she got distracted by those concerns and that awareness. I think that comes up regularly.
Oh, there's no question. So you know I love therapy, and we'll go all the
Don't know if
time.
it works, but
Right.
yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, I'm also can be somewhat grandiose, but
Grandiose is a better word.
yeah, and I don't know that I've ever gone to a therapist that I thought knew more clinically than I do.
Right.
And
But that's part of your defense.
exactly, and I'm self-aware enough to recognize that as a part of the defense. So I've never tried to use that as a reason to not go. But I will tell all of my therapists, I'm the best client that you will ever have because I'll do all the work, and you know, you just got to sit there and just say But at the same time,
I'll do all the intellectual masturbation that you want me to.
Exactly.
Just give me the payoff.
Exactly. But you know, the one gal that I was with for over 20 years eventually retired.
Yeah.
And I knew that this was going to happen. And so I build models. That's a thing that I do.
Yeah.
And I knew that she really liked Star Wars. And so I built her this X-Wing model with this elaborate base that had a picture of the Death Star on it. And,
Yeah.
and it was actually really, really well done. And I gave it to her, which she dutifully kept in her office until she retired. But to this day, it bothers me to wonder where did that model end up? Did it end up in a box and all broken up because it didn't mean anything to her, or is it displayed somewhere prominently in her
Or she give it
home?
to somebody else that might need it or benefit from
Exactly.
it. And what does it matter?
And it doesn't. It does. Well, exactly. But it does matter to me.
Why?
I don't know. I mean,
yes, you do.
well, yeah, because
It means you matter.
Yeah.
It means you stood
Right.
out from the herd. You were different from all of her other
right.
clients.
And I hate to
You were better. You were the
admit
favorite.
that, but yes, that's
Because
exactly
we
right.
have issues about being the favorite son.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Not that we need to go there. Yeah.
But we both think that it is incredibly ironic that this woman portrayed in the vignette is so persistent and consistent in her boundaries, yet sees clients out of her home. So what is the right answer?
What little vignette episode says she got to the office that's in the home one day when all the other doors are always closed. But the woman came in, or a door into another part of the house was open, and she could see one wall that was painted orange.
Yeah.
And
And she
could
made up
smell
all of this,
a
yeah.
pasta sauce.
Yeah.
So then she had this whole conversation with herself about, does she like Italian food? Does she
Right.
make her own? Yeah. So, but again, the point of all of that is that those are very real things that people think and feel and wonder about that offer an opportunity to strengthen a relationship with the therapist and a bond of trust, or break it.
Right. And so I'm going to tell you what my philosophy is, then you can say you agree, disagree, and why. But when I was in grad school, and this was a thing that we were actually talking about, and I had already been working in the mental health profession for a while because I had gotten a job there when I was an undergrad. And I really thought about this stuff. I actually really did contemplate how much self-disclosure is the right balance when you're doing therapy. And the conclusion that I came to is it doesn't really matter. It's not an issue of how much self-disclosure is appropriate. It's an issue of how genuine and sincere are you going to be in therapy, I only know one way to do that, and that's just to be me. I have to be me, and that's very disclosing and very genuine and upfront. And I don't make any apologies for that, but I've also known therapists who were very reserved and were very good therapists. It didn't change their effectiveness with their clients because they were being genuine and sincere. And genuinely and sincerely, that was how they did therapy. And so I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I don't know that I would regularly, routinely go out to a bar with a client, but I do think that it's okay for you to be more disclosing. It's okay for you to be less disclosing. The most important thing is that you have to be honest.
If honest is a synonym for genuine.
Yes, it is.
But the question that arises in my mind is how much of the conversation then becomes about you, and how much is what you are sharing a way to facilitate more disclosure and more access to it being about the client.
Right.
So the balance of that, rather than the existence of that, seems to make a difference.
Yes, and so a corollary to what I said is that it always has to be about the client. But you know, because I've had these conversations with you, that I struggle with the idea of my own intellectual masturbation and how much of that do I want to put on display, and where is that line? When does it start being about me?
You also struggle with how representative is your experience. So if I have a client that comes in who's struggling with this, and I'm like, oh, boy, I went through that as a child. How much of what I learned about my own childhood and my reactions to it am I now going to put onto this client as a countertransference issue that gets in the way of my being able to hear them accurately?
Right.
So again, it's dancing on the head of a lot of pins, and you have to make decisions. You can't just freeze and not go forward. But the questions need to be asked, which is why, at the end of the day, what we recommend is hierarchical or collegial supervision.
Absolutely.
So that you can go and have somebody ask you these questions of the conversation we're having. How self-revelatory are you? How invested are you? What's your ownership level of the affect that goes on? Are you self-indulgent, or is this a way to open a door for the client to be more revelatory? You have to have those conversations. And I don't know that the outside supervisor clinician can see inside the therapy. They just hear your report of it. But they can hear alarms go off based on their training to say, well, it sounds to me like this is the direction that you're going, and I'm wondering what would happen if you went in this direction.
And, I would say before I start this story that anything you see on TV is not real life and really should never be how you think in terms of any career, but especially a career in psychotherapy. But, I go back to the old Frasier show, and he and his brother were both very, very well-to-do psychiatrists, and they, we would never disclose anything to any of our patients about ourselves.
They were both very crazy in their own life, too.
And I think that's just a cover. I mean, if I knew a guy locally who was very, very high placed in the psychoanalytic community in St. Louis, and people just revered him, and his life was a mess.
Yeah.
And
well, that's always a question.
Nobody knew that.
The clients want to know, how crazy are you? How does this affect your life?
Right.
I mean, you're talking to me about handling this situation this way. If that happens in your life, do you handle it that way?
Right.
How's it work for you?
Yeah.
I want to know.
Yeah. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not at all and 10 being, come to my house and we'll have Christmas together, how self-disclosing were you in therapy?
I don't know that I can answer that.
Okay.
I would say that it would be driven by the experience and perception of the clients that I had. And I had over 35 years, a lot of clients. I saw adolescents, I saw men, I saw women, I saw couples, I did groups. So I don't know that I can give you a comprehensive.
So you're saying that the amount of
I was
disclosure
different in different sessions.
Okay, right. And so Would you say that was based on the transference, on what the client was needing from you, or countertransference, your experience of them, or was it both?
Again, Michael, I don't, as an honest answer, a genuine answer, I don't know. I would like to say that it was driven by
What was
my
clinically
understanding of
appropriate,
what the client needed from me. But I don't know that it was. It may have been driven by what I needed.
Yeah.
Because, again, we have things going on I just had a friend that died. I just had another friend that got a divorce. I just had another friend that went bankrupt. My dog's sick. I come to work today, and you're coming in as a client, and you're paying me good money to pay attention to you, and you're sitting there talking about, well, your dog died, and your friend, and I'm like, how do I keep it clean on how much of that is about me and my need to get emotional relief, and how much is it about you?
Yeah.
So it's a challenge. Every session is a challenge.
And I wonder if the real answer, I don't want to even say the right answer, but the real answer is that it doesn't necessarily even matter. What matters is the individual clinician's willingness and courageousness to wrestle with it, to be aware of it, and to maintain their own internal awareness of the dynamic.
One of my favorite cartoons ever is The Far Side by Larson.
Yeah, it's not surprising.
And one of my favorite Far Side cartoons is what we say to our dog. And we say, stop that, Ginger. Here's a cookie, Ginger. Let's go for a walk, Ginger. Don't chew on yourself, Ginger. Whatever we're saying. And then the next panel is what the dog hears.
Yeah.
It's blah, 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 Ginger. Blah, 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 Ginger. Blah, 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 Ginger. And I think therapy can be the same way. You don't know what the client hears. But what matters is what the client hears and what they internalize. I mean, you can say the most brilliant summative analysis of how they screwed up their lives, or their lives were screwed up for them, and they don't necessarily hear a damn thing except, I like green socks. Do you like green socks?
Man, it is not wasted on me to hear that comment, because I have 1,000 examples
But
of
you're always
these
talking to Ginger.
caffeine-fueled sermons that
In
I
our
would go on
conversations,
and say the most insightful thing, and then the next week they'd come back and they said, hey, when you told me that sometimes chocolate makes people anxious, that was, and I'm like, what?
They're just a little
Yeah. So you're so right on target with that.
That's because I'm a professional.
You're
trained
a professional,
experienced, qualified.
If you guys want to do us a favor as professionals, you can find us
Just
on
a
the
professional
interwebs
favor. Send money.
and go to the YouTubes, find us at Psych with Mike, and subscribe to the show there. That is something that we really appreciate. You can find us on the interwebs on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a comment and a rating. That helps other people find the show, which is really, really beneficial. As always, the music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue, and if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.